All right, well, welcome everybody to Haunted Toys. I'm going to start the presentation with a video, so we'll get this started.
You seriously think this doll is possessed, do you?
I wouldn't necessarily say possessed, but there is, it has got something. It's definitely got something.
You almost look like, Debbie, you don't want to even look at the doll.
No, I don't.
Are you a bit scared?
I don't even want to touch it.
Really?
Yeah.
So tell me about the doll. Do you collect dolls? Where did you get the doll from?
Actually, I hate dolls.
Oh.
Which is
Why did
really...
you buy it?
As an
Do
investment.
you know what? I bought
Did the doll call to you and say,
we walked
buy
past
me?
the shop. It wasn't actually a charity shop. It was like one of these second-hand shops.
Antique.
Yeah.
Shop, yeah.
And we walked past and we just, I think it was you, wasn't it? And you saw them and
I just thought
said, let's just go and have a look. And for some reason I said, let's buy them. And we
So
bought,
you say then, there's more
three.
than one. Okay.
We bought three. They were £5 each. And we thought, we'll buy them because they look like they're worth more than £5 each. You know, hands up, I bought them to
Look,
resell.
that chair's beginning
Chair's
to rock.
rocking.
Look at that.
Who's doing that? Stop it. Who's doing that?
Yeah.
But you separated these dolls, you brought them home, and immediately you could feel that this one, has this one got a name?
That's not it at all.
Yeah.
No, I put them in the spare room, and then we had friends coming to stay for the weekend, so I thought I better put them up. I put two in our room, one under the bed, one on top of the wardrobe, and one of them in the drawer. But the day before our friends came is the day he woke up with scratches on him.
Right, so I'm intrigued by these scratches, Cameron. So tell me what happened. You woke up in the morning.
Well, I literally woke up in the morning. I had my shower as normal, and then I felt a burning sensation on my leg. And I looked down, and there was a lot of scratches all over my knee. There must have been a dozen or 15 or so, but they looked like cat scratches. So
you could have just scratched yourself in the night, couldn't you? People do that.
I put my
He cuts
nails.
his nails to the skin.
Okay.
No,
Do you have a cat?
No,
Could
No.
you have scratched him?
no, that's what I said.
No,
but
this is the thing. Where the scratches were, and we've got like a big, like extra king size bed because we need a lot of room. Basically.
Well, you don't have to explain why you have just
Not Love
just
Island.
assume
Not
you
Love
do.
Island,
The thing
Debbie.
is, I have scratched him with my nails on his neck. the
Okay,
night
too
before,
much
and
detail.
it wakes him up.
The thing is,
Didn't wake
this
up,
incident
this
was
thing.
not isolated. Other things happened.
Yeah.
And all to the point where you ended up putting Her Highness out in the garden shed, and you locked her up in a box in the garden shed. And then when you went to revisit the box in the garden shed, tell us what you saw.
That necklace that's on her was right round her neck. It was really tight, about 5 or 6 times.
And that little pearl,
That little pearl necklace. And when I went to the shed, it was practically hanging off. She was in a plastic box with a lid, with 2 other boxes on top. No one had been in the shed all weekend.
Couldn't it have just been loose, the clasp, and just fallen off?
Never mind
It's
what it
not-
could have been. The fact is, all these things were happening.
There's no clasp.
And
It's
is
just like
this
big.
frightening you?
Yeah, a little bit.
Right, a little bit. Now, even last night, you were on neutral ground. You were in a hotel prior to this program, and you had an experience, a happening. What happened last night?
2 o'clock in the morning, I woke up and heard like a swishing noise going around my side of the bed.
what, like the dress?
What do you think was swishing?
Yeah, I don't know.
So you put the dog up for sale on
Dog.
the doll. Sorry, it was my throat glove. The doll.
Is it the doll?
The reason Ruth's laughing as
We
such
did,
is
yeah.
Ruth believes in these things and she pretends she doesn't.
You say that all the time.
It's absolutely true.
I'm scared.
Victoria Claire Fletcher says, I'm a believer, but I think it's strange how pretty much all these reported encounters with spirits are Victorian or thereabouts. Gaynor Green says, my nana has a collection of dolls in her dining room. They're so creepy. They look as if they're just waiting to pounce. Now, you put this up for sale, right? And you put it on the web, right? And you were quite upfront because you didn't want anybody buying this unless they knew this was possessed, as you believe
I didn't
possessed.
list it as a haunted doll. I listed it as a creepy doll. And I didn't at any point say it was haunted. I just said what it was, and I didn't want it in my house anymore.
And so you bought it for a £5.
Yeah.
How much is she on at the moment?
She's been bought and paid for £866.
Wow.
Which I'm quite embarrassed about. I just wanted to get rid of it.
But you've made
But-
861 quid in profit
Yeah.
on Cameron getting his leg scratched.
Yeah.
It's good. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, that's not so bad.
And was the person who's bought it interested because they think it's
He's the owner
doll
of
with
a
powers?
paranormal magazine,
Oh.
Ghosts of Britain or something. So yeah, he's interested in it because of obviously what it is.
And what about the other 2 dolls you bought with her? Are they,
Yeah, they're in my shed. I don't want them. They're on eBay at the moment as well.
They could be worth 1,600 quid.
No.
Someone could come and if the guy who's bought that one wants them, he can have them.
Yeah.
But I
So
don't want.
Ruthie, you don't believe this?
Well, I'm not. I don't believe in things being haunted. Like
Okay.
that,
Well,
so
will you then
she wouldn't
lift up
scare
the
me.
doll
Yeah.
and nurse it on your knee? Don't do it. I'm telling you. I'm telling you. Don't do it. Don't be all brave.
Nonsense.
I'm telling you, you could be bringing the spirit home with you. It's enough having one witch in the house. You like 2. I don't want that.
All right. So with haunted toys, this is actually inspired by one of my books. I don't need to go into all this stuff here. Skip through all that. One of my books for the series Haunted was the first one was called Haunted Toys, and I just wanted to do a book that was different. Not a lot of people have talked about haunted toys, and as you can see from that clip that I had just posted, was a case where a haunted doll was sold to another owner, and since then that owner has claimed to have experiences as well. So we'll go into some more about these haunted toys. Now, dolls have become excellent vehicles for horror movies. There's been tons and tons of movies that focus around haunted toys, especially dolls. You have Chucky, Billy, Annabelle, Jigsaw, and many, many more. But this all starts with our history when it comes to dolls. Now, if you have a fear of dolls, that's pediophobia. And this is a clip here is also another claim of a real haunted doll. Now, what that does is that it triggers that creepy feeling. And that is you're afraid of something or you're not sure, but you don't have enough information to respond, but it definitely puts you on guard. Now, the earliest reported dolls were poppets, effigies, voodoo dolls, which were created by early people for religious or ceremonial purposes. So this all starts with necromancy. Now, in Egypt, Emenes of Ramses III attempted to use wax images of his likeness to bring about his death. The dolls used in this ritual were said to be living and could curse anyone who bore their resemblance. Now, dolls are considered to be the oldest toy in the world. They were made out of clay, stone, wood, bone, ivory, leather, and even wax. But before the 18th and 19th centuries, dolls weren't identifying enough to be threatening. Only when they began to look more human-like did dolls start to become more creepy. So how can a doll be haunted? Oh, there we go. Children can have an extreme, strong focus of energy on a toy. This energy can be absorbed by the toy of their desire, causing it to become one with the child. A form of obsession may be at fault as well. The imaginary friend. This actually has been proven in many cases where the imaginary friend ended up being a ghost on the property. But also beware, negative traits can pass on as well, such as depression, mental illness, and even abuse. Now, there are 3 kinds of haunted objects. You have objects that absorb energy from their previous owner. You have objects possessed by a spirit. And you have objects that are cursed through a spiritual ritual. Now, how do you know if your toy is haunted? There are 5 signs to watch out for. 1 is bad vibes. Does this doll trigger that creepy factor? Suspicious origins. You don't know where this doll came from, especially if it's a doll that is handmade. You don't know who made the doll. Reanimation. Is the doll moving from room to room, or is its position moving, its head looking one way and then looking another? Suspicious sounds around the doll. You'll hear, in many cases, people have heard a child talking or giggling around a doll, or the sounds of crying, or even suspicious sounds in the house, such as walking or things moving. And doing harm. When the doll starts to become a tripping hazard, you may have something to worry about. Now, haunted dolls come in all shapes and sizes. They're empty shells that just stare at you, hollow inside, and emotionless vessels that need to be filled. Perfect for harboring psychic energy, or even some people would like to believe demonic presence as well. Now, speaking of that, Annabelle is actually one of the most famous haunted dolls out there. In fact, this inspired the movies. I think there's already 3 movies, 4th if you consider the beginning of The Conjuring. So the real story about Annabelle is this is a real picture of Annabelle, okay? Now, a prime example, when Hollywood gets a hold of the story, they got to make it scarier than it actually was. And so they felt that the Raggedy Ann doll that is featured in the Warrens Museum was not scary enough. So they created the more scarier doll that you see in the movies. But Annabelle's story is not as terrifying as the movies. And so I'll kind of tell you her story now. It's a 1970s Raggedy Ann doll. It's actually in the Warrens Occult Museum. It was actually originally owned by a student nurse. She received the doll as a gift from her mother, who was actually out doing some thrift store shopping. And she came across this Raggedy Ann doll and thought her daughter might get a kick out of the doll. So as soon as they received this doll, they started to find that it was showing up in odd places, going from one room to the other. You never saw it happen, but one day it would be in one room, come back the next day, and it's in another room. Or you go to bed and it's in the living room, and you wake up and it's in the kitchen, that type of thing. Now, there was also handwritten messages left throughout the house. And they say that these messages were what they assumed were written by a child. Now, the doll ended up getting the name Annabelle Higgins. Now, they got this name from a psychic. After having these interesting experiences with this doll, they ended up running into a psychic, and a psychic claimed that this doll was haunted by a little girl named Annabelle Higgins. And so they were a little more encouraged to play with this little girl. Well, that's when things got even worse. They say nightmares begun. Everybody in the household were having these terrible nightmares. In fact, they truly thought that this might be a demon, because in these nightmares, they'd be visited by a demon. One of the young ladies had her boyfriend over, and he would have these nightmares as well. And he claimed that in one of these nightmares, he was fighting something that was scratching at him. And when he woke up, there were scratches down his chest. So after having these more demonic experiences, this is when the Warrens came into play. And so the Warrens, Lorraine was the one that actually claimed that this was not a little girl. This was a demon posing as a little girl. And so that's when they actually took the doll off these young ladies' hands. Now, since they had the doll in their museum, things started getting interesting as well. Now, they had built, Ed had built this nice little box, as you can see that the doll is in. And they did this to protect anybody around the doll. But they said that that did not stop its evil powers. There was a situation where a young man had come into the museum, and he started taunting the doll. And Ed stepped in and said, please don't do that. And when the young man left, he was riding his motorcycle home. He actually crashed and died. and they claim that this could have very well had been Annabelle. Now, the reason why they claim that is there was another situation where a priest had come into the museum, and as soon as he saw Annabelle, he started throwing holy water on the case. And of course, Ed immediately stepped in and said, Father, please don't do that. And the priest, when he was leaving the museum and heading home, he claimed that he lost control of the car. And when he lost control of the car, he looked up in the rearview mirror and saw Annabelle sitting in the back seat. Now, of course, he lived to tell that story. Now, again, Hollywood has gotten a hold of this famous doll story and has now launched 3 movies. There's Annabelle, there's Origins, and then Annabelle Comes Home. But again, if you want some of the true element of Annabelle, in the very beginning of The Conjuring, when the Warrens are interviewing the 2 young ladies, those are the young ladies of the owner of Annabelle. So the other 3 movies have nothing to do with the doll itself, just so you know. Now, Letta the Gypsy Doll. This is one of my favorite stories. Now, Letta is actually over 200 years old, and they've identified the age of this doll by nails that were in the feet of the doll. Now, this was found by Kerry Walton in 1972. He had actually just recently lost his grandmother. And so he was going back to his home village for the funeral and helping the family get everything in order. And when he had gone back to this village, this is the village that he actually had grown up in. And he was walking, around in the village and walked past this house that he recalls from his childhood. This is a house that has been abandoned since he was a little kid. It is still abandoned to this day. And he was always afraid of this house because everybody in the village, claimed that this was a haunted house. But now being an adult, he kind of wanted to confront his fears, and curiosity got the best of him. So he goes and explores this old house. Now, he's also a collector of some antiques, so he thought, while he's exploring, maybe he'll find some fun little treasures. And so he starts, looking into all the cupboards and look, in all the closets, and he decides that he's going to, explore underneath the house too. And as soon as he starts to crawl under the house, he notices what he claimed to be the body of a child. And immediately, he panicked when he saw this body, and he jerked back and he hit his head on the floor, the upper floor. And he finally, calms down a little bit and, takes a better look, and he realizes that this is not the body of a child. It's actually a doll. So he drags this doll out from underneath the house, and here is this wooden doll. The clothes are so badly damaged, they just start to disintegrate in his hands. And he starts to examine this doll. Now it has, real human hair. The skull part pops off, and inside you can see a wooden brain inside of it. So he's just quite fascinated with this doll, so he decides he's going to keep it. Well, the story gets interesting because he ends up putting the doll in a plastic bag, and he throws it in the back of the car because him and his brother have now got to start driving home after the funeral. And so his brother's driving, he's in the passenger seat, and he kind of dozes off. It's a long drive. And when he wakes up, he looks over at his brother, and he can see his brother is white knuckled on the steering wheel and just freaking out. And he looks over and he says, what's wrong? And he says, do you hear that? And they listen for a while. And all of a sudden you hear what sounds like something rustling around in plastic, like a plastic bag rustling around. So he tells his brother to pull over, and they pull over, and he goes to the back, and, sure enough, the doll's still there in the bag, the plastic bag. So he goes ahead and tells his brother he'll go ahead and drive for the rest of the way. So he drives him home, and as soon as he brings this doll home, their pets freak out. The dogs just bark bark frantically at this doll. People claim to have gotten sick whenever they're around this doll. There's even stories of, the weather seems to change whenever they bring this doll out. It'll just start to rain for no apparent reason. There was even a story where they had brought the doll to a department store, and they had the doll, sitting back in the back of the department store. And one woman, she had just walked into the department store and all of a sudden just freaked out, started having seizures, and passed out in the front of the store, not even knowing about the doll that was in the back. So there was a lot of those interesting encounters that people started to have whenever this doll was around. Well, the doll started getting more and more popular, but he actually decided, before the doll's fame, he was actually going to store this doll away, because it was freaking out everybody. People were getting sick around this doll. So he stored the doll in the floorboards under the floor. He had this little storage area underneath the floor, and so he put the doll in there. And he said that late at night they would hear the doll screaming and pounding on the floor, "Let me out, let me out." And that's how it actually got its name, Letta. Well, they say his facial expressions would change. He's been known to move. His head would be looking one way, and then the next it'd be looking another way. Strange noises again around this doll. Well, one day they were doing an appearance on a talk show, and the talk show had actually brought in a psychic, because they were kind of curious as to what was going on with this doll as well. And so was Kerry as well. He had not had any work with a psychic, so he was curious to see what was going on. And the psychic claimed that this doll was harboring the spirit of a little boy that had drowned, and that the father was actually a gypsy. And the gypsies did believe that they could transfer the spirits of loved ones into objects. And so they do believe that the father, after losing his child suddenly, had transferred his child's soul into this doll. Now, after this doll had gotten some attention and his family started to grow, he decided that they needed to buy a bigger house. Now, he was a little short on money, but realizing that he did have this antique doll that he was pretty sure he could get some good money for, he did put it up for sale. And he got a really good offer for this doll. So he committed to the sale. And so he was to deliver this doll to this woman. So he gets in the car, he first put Letta in the passenger seat, buckled the seatbelt, and then he gets in the car and they drive to this woman's house. And he drives up into the driveway, turns off the car, and he goes to take off his seatbelt, and all of a sudden he's just frozen. He can't move. And he's sitting there for what he claims felt like a good 10-15 minutes, which probably maybe had been just a couple minutes, but it just seemed like forever. And he slowly had looked over at Letta, and right when he looked at Letta, he had this feeling like, you know what, I cannot get rid of this doll. And once he had committed to himself that he was not willing to get rid of the doll, all of a sudden that overwhelming feeling of frozenness just was gone. So he puts his seatbelt back on, starts up the car, and he drives back home. And when he gets home, he contacts the woman and says, "I'm so sorry, I cannot depart with this doll." And that woman offered him twice as much money, and he still did not sell that doll. So this doll has actually become a permanent part of this family. And to this day, they still own Letta. Now, Robert the doll. Now, Robert is a pretty famous haunted doll. This doll is actually in a museum. But his story is actually goes back to Robert Eugene Otto. He was actually a young boy who received this doll in 1906 for his 4th birthday. Now, Otto had become obsessed with this doll to the point where he actually gave the doll his name, and he started to go by Eugene. Now, I do want to point out too that there is a lot of misconceptions when it comes to Robert the doll, because there's a lot of different stories out there as to the origins of Robert. There are stories that their maid who practiced voodoo had given Eugene the doll on his birthday, and that is not true. The story actually is that the doll was given to him by his grandfather. And his grandfather, since they could not figure out where this doll came from, is because this doll was not made as a doll. The doll was actually a window display figure for children's clothing. So that is why it was so hard to trace the origins of this doll, because it was not sold as a doll. It was sold as kind of like a child's mannequin. So again, once had received this doll, his obsession was so strong with this doll. I mean, he blamed this doll for anything that went wrong. You know, a dish got broke. Oh, it was Robert. Robert did it. They even claimed that when Eugene would be alone with Robert, they would hear, you know, Eugene talking to the doll, and then they would hear another voice talking back. And so they said that they claimed that this could not have been Eugene, this voice they had never heard before. Well, Robert was even given his own room. On the top floor, they had this little turret room that they weren't using, so they converted it into a little room for Robert. He had his own little furniture, everything. And he'd be left alone in that room. Now, what had happened is Eugene had grown up. He moved out of the house, leaving Robert behind when he went to college. And while he was away, he ended up getting married to Annette Parker. And then what happened is his mother had gotten sick, and she was on her deathbed. So Eugene and his new wife, Annette, decide to move back to Key West so he could help to take care of his mother and the estate in her, last days. Well, once Eugene came back to the house, that obsession with the doll started all over again. And Annette started to witness this as well, where the doll was getting more attention than his own wife. And she developed this hatred towards the doll. Well, Eugene died in 1972 or 1974. And after his death, his wife had, obtained the estate and the house and, of course, the doll. So she just wanted to get away from it all. So she actually sold the property along with the doll to a woman. And this woman actually decided, due to this eeriness, because there were stories circulating about this doll throughout the neighborhood. Being that he still had his room. That room was still up there with his little furniture, and they just left the doll up there. Many people walking by would claim to see Robert looking in one window, and then when you walk by the other way, he'd be in another window. A lot of that strange stuff had circulated for years and years, especially when Eugene was away at college. The mother didn't do anything with that room. She just left the doll and everything up there, for Eugene to deal with when he came home. And of course, again, throughout all these years, that was all these stories, the haunted doll, the doll moving around from window to window upstairs in his room. And so again, after his death, his wife didn't want any of this stuff anymore. She sold it. The new owner decided she just didn't want the doll. She'll keep the house, but she didn't want the doll. So she ended up donating the doll to the museum. And this is where it gets even stranger. Now, Robert sits in a glass case in this museum. And if you ever visit him in Key West, you will actually see around him on the walls are all these handwritten notes. And the reason why there's all these notes is because the story is that if you happen to take a picture of Robert and you don't ask for his permission to take the picture, bad things may happen to you. Many people feel that they've been cursed by Robert. And so they'll actually write letters of apology and send them to the museum. And so, of course, they'll put them up for Robert to see, just asking for forgiveness. They say if you're disrespectful to Robert, he will actually curse you. So you'll see in a video that I'm going to share with you guys all these photos. Actually, I don't know if I have the video. Let me see if there's some photos here. But yeah, again, if you ever look him up, you'll see lots of those letters. But he was also the inspiration for Chucky as well in the movie Child's Play. Yep, there it is. There's a photo. So again, there are all those handwritten letters of apology from all these people that claim that they've been cursed by Robert. Now, another interesting story is this little stuffed animal that is with Robert in his glass case. Now, no one claims to have given him this stuffed animal. He was the only one in the case sitting on that chair. Well, the story is that one day they had closed down the museum and came back the next morning and found that this stuffed animal was in his lap. And they said this stuffed animal had actually come from another display case. So no one knows exactly how he got this little stuffed lion. But ever since then, it has been with Robert. Now, Mandy is another interesting doll. I've had the opportunity to meet Mandy. Mandy's story, actually, let me go back. Mandy's story is she was actually discovered when a man was wandering through a neighborhood and was walking by an abandoned house, and he heard a child crying from the basement of that house. So, of course, thinking a child had gotten into the house, may have gotten hurt, he goes to investigate, and when he gets down in the basement area, he cannot find any child down there, but he does see this doll. And so he ends up taking the doll home with him. And since he had brought the doll home, many had claimed some interesting phenomena. From hearing again that little girl crying, just strange noises, the doll moving around from place to place. Again, it's turning its head, moving its hands. Well, after a few months of this, his wife doesn't want the doll, so she decides to donate it to the museum. Now, of course, there is certain protocol that this museum follows. So whenever they receive an artifact, they'll put it in plastic, Ziploc bag usually. That's because if there's any bugs or anything in the doll, this will kill off any of those bugs. Now, as soon as they put the doll in that Ziploc bag, that night when the museum curator came in, she was surprised to find that her whole office was destroyed. Everything was knocked on the floor, tipped over, broken. And so they thought somebody had broken into the building, and no one had broken in. Nothing was, taken. It just happened in her office. So they do believe that Mandy had something to do with this as well. Since then, she's been on display. Again, she's also in her own little glass case, and people who have visited Mandy have had some strange experiences, that sick feeling when they see her. One person who I've actually had the opportunity to interview said that when he saw her, all of a sudden he got into a trance. And he what happened is he wandered out of the museum and just wandered out into the street, and his friends had to grab him and pull him back before he got hit by a car. So Mandy's story, again, we don't know the origin of Mandy or who might be haunting Mandy, but that is the Mandy doll. Now, I'm going to show you guys a video, and this is one of those interesting videos where they claim to have captured, well, they do capture the doll moving. So watch this.
shows a doll in a white dress moving its head.
Now, one of the things that I've noticed when it comes to a lot of haunted objects, a lot of times when they do capture movement, it's very subtle. Sometimes they have to speed up the clock just to kind of show you that big movement from A to B. And I think that's why in a lot of cases, most people don't recognize or realize that the doll is moving because it's very subtle. And sometimes it takes it a good, hour to complete the full movement. So that's why they'll put a lot of cameras on haunted objects and then speed it up so you can actually see it moving. And I do have another video of that where you can see the camera's been sped up. Now, ventriloquist dolls. These are one of my favorites. Now, ventriloquism was actually a religious practice. This is before the dolls themselves. So that throwing of the voice, basically, this is when they had the belief that spirits took up residency in the stomach. So a lot of these, fortune tellers, mediums would throw their voice and claim that it was coming from the spirit within their stomach. Well, in the 16th century, Christianity believed that this was the work of the devil. So anybody practicing this was hung or even burned at the stake. It was also believed that demons could speak through any orifice, from the nostrils to the anus, even talking vaginas. But that's a different lecture. So in the 18th century, trickery later became entertainment. And this is when you had the vaudeville shows, or even spiritualism was a big part of this as well. Spiritualism had what they called the trumpet mediums. And these were these big silver trumpets that would float in the air. And then, of course, you would hear voices coming from the trumpet, which they believe or have proven that a lot of this was ventriloquism, where they claim that the voices were coming through these trumpets. But as I said, the vaudeville stage was a big part of this. Vaudeville, which basically introduces the dummy. So now you have this vessel that you can focus your attention on. So they would basically create these personalities for these dolls, or alter egos. Now, therapists and patients have actually used these dolls for people who are dealing with split personality cases. So they try to get them to split themselves when you have that split personality, to have it exit their personal body and now become a part of this inanimate object. And so they believe that this is somehow, in many cases, where a lot of these dolls could become possessed. So this personality carry on even after death. And one of the dolls that I have in my possession is Mr. Creepy. Now, Mr. Creepy was actually made in the 1960s by a retired ventriloquist artist. He actually goes back to the vaudeville days in the Northwest here. And he actually created this doll that you see in the picture, and he created a female counterpart as well. Now, what makes these dolls extra creepy is they actually made them in their likeness. And this is a photo of the gentleman right there. He is the creator of the doll, Mr. Creepy, and you can see his other works. You can see the similarities as well of these other dolls that he had actually made. Now, the interesting thing is unfortunately, the couple had actually passed away. And after their passing, the dolls were sold at an estate sale. And a woman who actually deals with antiques, she purchased the dolls and she put them on display on a shelf behind a register. Now, no issues whatsoever. In fact, they sat there for a good long time. And what happened is they ended up selling her building. So unfortunately, she had to pack up and move to another location. So she packed up the dolls separately and she put them into storage. And what happened is when she got her new location, she started to stock up her new store. And she found him, but she could not find the female counterpart. But she went ahead and put him on display in a glass case behind the cabinet. Now, soon as she had done this, this is when strange things started to happen. She'd feel as if somebody was constantly standing behind her and watching her. She felt like there was somebody breathing down the back of her neck. She just always get these chills. Said some days she'd even come in and find that he was looking in another direction. Some days his head would be turned. Some days his eyes would be looking in a different direction. Now, what's really odd about that is his eyes are actually spring-loaded. So what that means are when you're playing around with the trigger to move his eyes left or right, once you let go of the trigger, the eyes automatically spring back to the center. So you cannot make him look left or right unless you're holding on to that trigger. And she would find him looking left or looking right. I've witnessed this myself. And when I go to explore and try to figure out what's causing this, soon as you touch him or any light vibration, his eyes automatically spring right back to the center. Well, this was happening so often that she decided she didn't want to deal with him on a daily basis. So she moved him to the back of the store and she put him on a bottom shelf. She didn't have to see him every day. And so when I went into her store looking for pieces for my museum, I had asked her, I said, do you have anything that's odd? You know, because I just like to hear their stories and see what she had. And she immediately introduced me to him. And so she told me his story. And I said, I'd be more than happy to give him a home. And so she was happy to get rid of him, that she sold me him for $1. So I had actually brought him to Spooked. I had put him in this glass case that we had. And I was alone at Spooked one day, and I was in the office when I heard a thud against glass. I immediately thought something happened in the gift shop. So I go out to the gift shop. I'm exploring, and I can't find anything disturbed. So I'm just kind of walking around, and as I'm coming around these tables that we had, I'm now facing the glass case. And as soon as I looked in the glass case where he was, I realized his head was now turned and up against the glass. So immediately I take a picture just to prove that this really happened. And I'm going to actually show you that picture. But before I do that, I'll also show you the pictures of his eyes as well. You can see he's in this glass case. It's a different case we had moved him to. And you can see he's always looking dead center. All right. And then one day when you come in, you'll find that there he is. You know, his eyes are looking to the right. But going to that picture that I took of him when I had heard that strange knock against glass, this is that photo. Now, what's really odd about that, and you can see his head is turned almost completely sideways. This is the front of him. But what's odd is the reflection in the glass. If you look closely, you can see he's got these very droopy eyes, more elongated face. Looks more lifelike. I think that is the man that actually haunts us all. A lot of people ask me why. And I think he's just looking for the female counterpart. They hadn't been separated since the day they were created. So I am on a quest to try and find her. Evil Elmo. Now, Evil Elmo was back in 2008 when the Bowman family's daughter receives an Elmo toy that will actually say her name, and all of a sudden it started to say, "Kill James, kill James." And this happened right after they had changed the batteries on the toy. And I will actually play you guys the video clip from that.
Everyone's going to be talking about this weekend. A mother changes the batteries on Can't hear it.
The audio is real low.
Yes, we can't hear it.
Oh, sorry. Forgot.
Everyone's going to be talking about this weekend. A mother changes the batteries on her son's talking Elmo doll and is stunned to hear what comes out of its mouth. You will be too. That's right. The Elmo doll is saying, "Kill James." That's the name of the boy who owns the Elmo Knows Your Name doll. You plug it into the computer so it will repeat the child's name. Well, the doll ran out of batteries, so the mom replaced them. That's when it started making death threats.
It's not something that really you would think that would ever come out of a toy, but once I heard it, I was just kind of distraught.
Even
Yeah. Just another interesting story out there. Now, clowns. Yes. Everybody loves a good clown story. Now, Poltergeist, the movie Poltergeist, reinstated our fears when it comes to creepy clowns. In fact, this clip here is from the remake of Poltergeist, but I'm sure you might even remember the old one from the 80s with the other clown doll that pulls the kid underneath the bed. But clowns, there is a huge fear of this. It's not uncommon for people to have that fear of clowns. And this is chlorophobia. And again, this is where it states that creepiness. You know, you don't know if you should be threatened by this or not. But some of the most famous clowns are Pogo the Clown. And a lot of people don't know who Pogo the Clown is, but if you are a fan of serial killers, Pogo the Clown is actually John Wayne Gacy. He is actually a serial killer, killed a bunch of young men, buried them under his house. But he volunteered his time as a clown at the local hospital, calling himself Pogo. Now, Ted is another haunted clown doll. And his story is pretty interesting. When this family bought him at a thrift store shop, they claimed that when they brought him into the home, they would hear whispering or even giggling. And they had no children at the home. Things were found broken or even missing. But they would also hear him move from room to room with the sounds of shuffling. What makes this story interesting is this doll had always been sitting on a shelf. And if you look closely throughout the years that they've had the doll, all of a sudden they started to notice that there was some wear and tear on his feet. Now, Clyde the Clown. This is another interesting doll. This is one of those where, again, witnesses had seen him move. So the guy decides to put a camera on the doll, and he claims that he captured him moving. So I will play that video for you guys.
It was uploaded in August 2016 and shows a creepy vintage toy clown lifting its head.
You'll see there's no more audio, but again, they'll speed it up and you can see that the head actually moves a lot. It's more definite when you see it sped up. So again, this goes back to that theory. I think sometimes when you have these encounters with haunted objects, you don't always notice it right away. Sometimes it takes quite a while for them to make the complete movement. Now, the Clown Motel. This is another one of those interesting places. This is in Nevada. It was built in 1985. It is next to a cemetery, so that makes it extra creepy. But many people have claimed to hear disembodied voices. There's also stories of things will move on their own, and a clown has been known to appear at the foot of people's beds. Now, I have been to this place. It is, the best way to describe it is it's just a Motel 6. People think that when they go into their rooms that all the rooms are going to be filled with dozens and dozens of clowns. No. You may have clown pictures on the walls, and that's about it. All the clowns that you see in any of the photos and the videos are in the lobby. In fact, the video that I'm going to share with you guys, this is the previous owner, the woman who actually collected clowns. She has this big life-size clown in the lobby. And in this video, she's pointing out her clown collection, but you can see the hand of that big life-size clown drop and move. And in the video, she responds to it, the owner, and puts her hands up and says, "That wasn't me." So watch this video. And there's no audio, so you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, but this is a huge clown collection. Now play one more time, and again, just watch that hand. The right hand will move. It's right when they pan over to it. Yeah. Now Ouija boards. Oh, one of my favorites. So many interesting stories when it comes to Ouija boards. But a lot of this, it gets interesting, but I do have to tell you the origins of Ouija boards. This was actually developed in 1890. Elijah Bond actually was the original developer of the Ouija board. And this was actually developed as a dating game. You have to understand that this was a time when couples weren't allowed to be intimate until you were married. So you weren't allowed to be, holding hands in public or kissing in public, that type of thing until you actually had made that final commitment. So this was a fun little toy for couples who were dating to play. So you would actually sit with two chairs facing each other. Your knees would be touching. So that was a little bit of intimacy right there. And then you had this, planchette where your hands would lightly touch as well. And you could just ask, all kinds of, fun little questions. And as you can see, even some of the questions that they would ask in this advertisement, but, you could ask, oh, does he think I'm cute? And if he did, he could move it over to yes. So a toy that allowed them to kind of break the ice between this couple as well. Now, William basically took over in 1901. And this is when the toy had made a complete change. And what happened was during World War II, a spiritualist named Pearl Curran claimed to have used a Ouija board to make contact with her spirit guide. And her spirit guide had her write out all these stories, plays, poetry, all the stuff that she claimed came from her spirit guide. She'd write it down. What made this story stick was the fact that Pearl had never even made it to the 6th grade. So they claimed that a woman who did not have wasn't very well educated had written a lot of this amazing stuff. So this is what made that story stick, that she, again, was using the Ouija board to contact her spirit guide. Well, then after this story came out, he remarketed the device and claimed that it was a way to contact the dead. And so by 1966, Parker Brothers buys the rights to the Ouija board. Now, one of the most interesting claims is a lot of people who play with the Ouija board say that they've made contact with Zozo. And Zozo is believed to be a demon that comes through the Ouija board. Now, there's been over 1,000 encounters over the world, throughout the world, reports dating back to 1906 of Zozo. He's known to cause physical disturbances, mental harm, possession, with some cases claiming suicide of those making contact with Zozo. Now, there's also some photos that people claim to have had paranormal activity when playing with the Ouija board. So in this one, they claim to have captured this figure in the background. This one, they claim to have captured this face. This one, again, another figure appearing in the background after playing with the Ouija board. And this one, this number 6 appearing on the back of this guy's neck. But one of the most interesting cases is this one where it has to do with a mass possession. And this was in 2016 in Peru. A bunch of school kids were playing around with the Ouija board in school. They claimed that the school is built over a graveyard, so they wanted to make contact with the spirits there. Now, when they were playing around with the Ouija board, over 75 students and 2 teachers claimed to have been possessed or attacked by whatever they conjured by using the Ouija board. They went into seizures, foaming at the mouth, fainting, and uncontrollable crying and screaming fits. Some of them claim to have been seeing visions of a man in black trying to kill them. And here is a video clip of that.
Están trayendo a una estudiante desmayada. No sé qué es lo que está pasando en esta oportunidad. No, las estudiantes. Remostrada en estado de seguridad ciudadana. Rotundamente, los padres de familia también han llegado a esta institución educativa para ver qué es lo que está pasando con sus menores hijas por el desmayo continuo. En esta oportunidad hay muchas...
So definitely an interesting case there. Now, moving on, not necessarily with haunted toys, but this takes us into haunted games as well. Hide and seek alone is one of my favorites. This is where you actually take a doll and you'll actually gut the doll. You'll fill it with rice. You'll also put maybe your fingernail clippings or your hair clippings inside this doll to build this bond with this doll. And then what happens is you'll go off and hide. And you do this in the dark, so you have to shut off all the lights. You'll put the radio station on a static station, and they say that this is to help to build that communication with the doll. Then after you find your hiding spot, you'll stay there for about 10 seconds, and then you go back to the doll. And during this time, you actually have this knife, and you'll stab this doll 3 times when you see the doll, and you'll say, "You're it, you're it, you're it." And you leave the knife with the doll, and then you go back to your hiding spot. And they'll say that during this, you'll actually hear the doll coming for you. They'll say that you'll actually hear what sounds like pitter patter of feet going up and down the hall. You may even hear the doll talking to you as well. There are claims that you'll hear doors slamming, the pitter patter of feet. You'll hear it say, "I'm coming now," through that static of the radio stations. Or even hear it say, "Where are you?" Yeah. Or, "I'm very close." Yeah, that's an interesting one. Now, Charlie Charlie is another game that children have played, and they claim that this comes from a Spanish demon. And this is again where you could set two pencils, one on top of each other, and they claim that the pencil will move on its own and point to either yes or no. And so you can ask simple questions like that and see if you get a response. The bath game. Another interesting game that children have played. And this is where, again, you turn off all the lights, you go into the bath, you'll strip naked, get in the bathtub with no lights on, and you start washing your hair. And as you're washing your hair, what you're supposed to do is you'll summon this spirit. And you keep saying this incantation, and you'll visualize this woman falling in the bathtub, and she actually pierces her head on the faucet. And this is actually, the claim is that this is a real woman who actually died in the bathtub due by falling, and you're summoning her spirit. And they'll say that as you're doing the summoning spell, you'll actually feel her appear behind you. Some people say that you'll feel her rise out of the water behind you. Some say you'll feel her wet hair dripping on your back, or, it'll actually be coming up your back as she rises out of the water. Now, the interesting part of this game is you have to remain calm, because once you've summoned her, now you have to get out of the bathroom calmly, and you're doing this all naked and wet, and then you shut the door and you leave her in the bathroom. Then you go to your bedroom and you go to bed, because the game actually starts the next day. Because basically what happens is throughout the day, you're going to be playing what we mostly are familiar with, red light, green light, with the ghost. And if you're not familiar with that game, is where you'll turn your back to the people and you basically say red light, or when your back is to the people, that's green light. And so they try to get as close to you as possible. And right when you turn around, you say red light, and so they have to freeze. And so you're kind of playing that similar game with the ghost. So every time your back is turned, the ghost is trying to get to you as closely as possible, trying to reach you. But every time you turn around and face the ghost, the ghost has to freeze. And so you're looking around for the ghost, and you try to keep this distance between the ghost, and you want to make sure that the ghost does not get close enough to touch you, because they say if it does touch you, then you'll be haunted by nightmares. So that is the game itself. And then when you're done with the game, the rest of the day, you'll basically say, I cut you loose, by making this choppy motion as well. And they say that that will end the game. Now, ghostly children. I'll share a couple stories with you about ghostly children real quick before we call it a night. This is one of the most famous stories out there. This is the 1950s, when Julian actually leaves his family and moves to a remote island. No one knows why. It has been a mystery, but he becomes a hermit on this island that he claims is haunted by a little girl who drowned in the nearby canal. And so to appease the spirit of this little girl, he starts to collect dolls, and he hangs them up throughout the island just to keep this little girl happy, so he could be left alone. But they say that what's interesting is he would do whatever he could to get a hold of dolls, and it didn't have to be a complete doll. It could be doll pieces as well. And he would trade his own food that he had grown on the island when he'd go back to Mexico City, and trade food just for these dolls. That's all he wanted, was just these dolls. And so what happened is in 2001, his body was actually found in the same canal that he claims that the little girl's body was found. No one knows how he died. Now, since then, they do believe that the island is cursed. And so a lot of locals will not take you to the island. They stay away from the island. And they say that this little girl still haunts this island. You will actually hear her whistling or singing, or the dolls are known to move by themselves. In fact, I will actually show you a clip of when Ghost Adventures did their investigation.
2014, the television show Ghost Adventures traveled to the island of the dolls to investigate. As part of their investigation, they explored the small shack where Julian Santana Pereira had lived. Over the course of their investigation, they experienced many strange and unexplainable incidents, like this one.
Ready? No, I'm not ready for this.
Oh! Whoa!
Bro, come here!
Oh my God. Oh my God.
One of them's laughing.
Oh my God.
Oh my God, bro!
As you can hear in the clip, the screech of a frightened cat scares the two investigators, and then immediately one of the weathered dolls in the shack seemingly begins to laugh at them.
Oh. Whoa!
Now, that wouldn't be so abnormal. After all, many battery-operated dolls can laugh or cry. However, when the investigators check the doll, they find that not only does the doll not have batteries to make it laugh, but the entire battery compartment has been ripped from the back of the doll.
All right. Now, the Gate to Hell. This is a cemetery in the middle of the woods known as the Killing Field. And I'll tell you why it got its name in just a little bit here. But it was actually originally known as the Casey Family Cemetery. And it has tombstones dating back to the 1800s. And it has a huge section of just children as well. Again, children died quite often back in the days. But in 2008, the remains of various animals were found on the grounds. They had been sacrificed. So since then, claiming that, you know, demonic presence was there due to satanic rituals. And this is proof. You can actually look up the news article where they had found all these bodies of these animals that had been sacrificed. But since then, they do claim that there is a very dark presence around the area. Now, what they believe is whatever or whoever was doing these rituals may have stirred up something. And they believe, the story is that the children that are laid to rest there, their spirits are scared of whatever's been brought forth. And so when people go to visit, and again, this is in the middle of the woods, you literally have to drive down this dirt road for at least a good, 5 to 6 miles into the woods. And the problem is the kids don't want you to leave. They want you there to protect them. And so they'll do whatever they can to keep you there. And so many people have claimed that when they try to leave the cemetery, they have car trouble. One car was actually abandoned there because they could never get it started again. And so what they say the best thing to do to have a safe escape is to leave toys or some sort of money for the children. And when you leave that behind, the children will actually let you leave. Now, there's been strange lights seen in the cemetery as well. Now, this was actually taken with film before digital cameras. When we started to have the problems with dust orbs, this was not an issue when you had film. And you can see this green glowing light that they captured in the cemetery with film. Children are seen and heard throughout the cemetery, but there's also this demonic or dark shadow that they see wandering around the border of the cemetery. And the odd thing is I actually visited the cemetery, and I remember stepping into the gully just outside the cemetery, and there was this stillness, this silence. You didn't even hear birds chirping. That was just quite odd. And so that actually I can validate. Now, our last story is a spooky little girl. This is a story about this child encounter that we had at our old location, where when I found this chair, the chair had actually moved around by itself. So I actually purchased this doll for what we believed was a little girl that haunted this area. And so I wanted her to feel welcomed here. So I had bought this doll. Now this doll actually has a wind-up key in her back. So if you wind her up, there's a music box inside of her that you'll actually hear play. And in this video clip that I'm going to play for you guys, you're actually going to hear a certain situation where the gentleman who walks into the room filming, he asked, "Did you get your balls?" And he's actually referring to ping pong balls because they're so light, they'll be used on investigations to see if they move around. But right when he walks in the room, you'll actually hear the doll playing. And the team gets all excited. And so the team lead is trying to get everybody to be quiet so that they can record the doll playing. And so he says, "Hush" out loud to shut everybody up. But right when he says "hush" out loud, the doll stops too. So I'll play this video for you guys.
Did you guys get your balls? Oh, hey. Did you hear that? Hush.
All right, so hopefully you guys could hear that. So in closing, just want to remind you, we got definitely a bunch of different classes. I got some new ones coming out. So definitely check that out. Mark, what's the next one?
I think next week, Tuesday and Thursday, it's cemeteries. What's the name of it? Cemetery Part 1 and Part 2.
Okay.
That's Tuesday and then Thursday.
Tuesday and Thursday. All right. So that one just covers a lot of the history of cemeteries and even the symbolism when you check out the tombstones and everything. So definitely check that out if you guys get a chance. So in closing, while some toys are meant to be played with, be aware that there are toys that may want to play with you.